The astonishing diversity and richness of culture in India, together with this very modern sense of dynamism and ambition, as the Prime Minister made clear in his speech, leaves a real impact on visitors like me. Now, of course, I know, and you know, that India as a nation has many obstacles and challenges to overcome. But in one sense, that makes the future even more exciting. And it's the sense of possibility, as I've travelled around the country, the determination of everyone to build on the huge potential of people here that's taken my breath away. And the whole world, too, will benefit from the increasing influence and prestige of India as a democratic force for good on our planet. How do you realise the extraordinary potential in this country? And above all, in your over 1 billion citizens. That's what I've been asked to talk about today. But above all, I want to address the crucial importance of educating girls for the health, strength, and prosperity of India, and indeed of the world. Now, I know that this is a subject which is of real interest for the Hindustan Times, because I did a Google search of the paper about stories on education and girls, and it brought up over 100,000 separate links. And I also know, of course, that the education of girls is high on the priorities of your government, both at national and local level. But of course, the importance to be attached to education should come as no surprise to me, whose husband came to fame on the phrase, education, education, education. But in India, for thousands of years, you have been a country of learning and knowledge, which you have shared with the wider world. And that stress on education travels with Indian families wherever they go. And it certainly marks out families with an Indian background who come to live in my country, in Britain. And it explains why they and their children have contributed so much to our country and to our success. Now, as you mentioned, one of the reasons that I share a passion for education with my husband, and why I am particularly passionate about the importance of educating girls, is that I myself am an example of just what a difference it can make to individual lives. Because I can assure you that without the benefit of education, I certainly would not be standing here in front of you, nor would I ever have had the chance of becoming a Queen's Counsel. Now, I certainly don't want to overdo the rags to riches stories, which, as I know, are very popular in magazines here in India, as they are back home in the UK. And my difficulties were nothing compared to the difficulties that the Prime Minister spoke about in his life just earlier this morning. But you know, there was nothing in my background that suggested that I would ever become a lawyer. I was the first in my family to attend university. And I was brought up in Liverpool. And if you listen hard, you may still hear the traces of that accent that the Beatles made famous in my voice. I'm very proud that can call Liverpool my home. But it was, and is, very much a working-class city. And my childhood was no different from the many thousands of my neighbours. We were not dirt poor by any means, but we certainly didn't have much money either. There was a difference, however, and that was that I was brought up in an all-female household by my mother and my grandmother, who was her mother-in-law, as it happens, because my father abandoned our family when I was young. My mum and my grandma were both very intelligent women, but both had left school at 14. They were determined, however, that the full advantages of education which was denied to them should be given to myself and my sister. And I was lucky too, because the state paid for my education. I got a scholarship place at a local state grammar school, where the nuns drummed it into the pupils that hard work and dedication could deliver our dreams. And in fact, it turned me into a pretty confident young woman. Liverpudlians, or Scousers as we're called, are famed for being pretty brash and confident, and I was certainly no exception. I remember when I was 14 telling my classmates that my ambition was to become the first British female Prime Minister. Well, Margaret Thatcher beat me to that, but I did make it to Downing Street, even if it wasn't in my own right. But I can trace all those opportunities to the doors opened to me by education. Without this springboard, I would never have left home at 18 and gone down to London to study law at the London School of Economics. I would never have joined Lincoln's Inn on a full scholarship and become a barrister, a QC, and a recorder, a part-time judge. And because Tony and I met when we were barristers in the same chambers, I would never have married who I did, nor have had the enormous privilege of living in number 10. So, you see, education really does change lives. And those changes come even faster if there are role models who can break through the cultural barriers that women find. It certainly made a difference to me. One of the reasons I chose law as a profession was because the first ever woman to become a QC in Britain was Rose Heilbronn. And she, like me, came from Liverpool. And as a young girl, I rather naively thought that if she could do it coming from Liverpool, so could I. That was my first taste of the power of role models, and why every time a woman breaks through the glass ceiling, it's a huge advance for every woman. But what I didn't know at the time, and probably it's just as well, was that Rose Heilbronn was famous precisely because she was the exception, not the rule. And it was only when I started practicing as a lawyer 30 years ago that I suddenly realized that much of the legal world then thought that women were automatically disqualified from going to the top. Now, I don't want to say that was a unique notion for the legal profession. In the 1970s, it was widespread across the UK. When I was called to the bar in 1976, it was the first year that the number of women called to the bar went into double figures. And it wasn't just numbers that were against women, it was the culture of the time. As a law student, every law student was given a first text to read. It was called Learning the Law by Professor Glanville Williams of Cambridge. Now, in the 1973, not 1903 edition of that book, he warned of the difficulties of women succeeding in the profession that I'd chosen, when he said this: "Practice at the bar is a demanding task for a man. It's even more difficult for a woman. It's not easy for a young man to get up and face the court. Many women find it harder still. A woman's voice does not carry as well as a man's." I've always wondered whether Mrs. Glanville Williams was a very quiet and obedient wife. These days, of course, those remarks would bring you a lawsuit in the UK, not a law textbook. So we have seen changes in 30 years, not just in the law, but across society. Overt prejudice and discrimination has been rooted out, partly due to legislation, or at least been driven deep underground. Now, in the UK, women are coming into the professions in bigger and bigger numbers. There are now more women law students in our universities than there are men, including my own daughter. Organisations across the board are trying to develop and promote talented women, which is fantastic. But even in the UK, there remain big obstacles. women still earn something like 20% less than men. Decades after women entered business in large numbers, women make up only 14% of the directors of the UK's biggest companies. And this is true in the law as well. Women barristers earn as much as 40% less than the male counterparts. And women might now make up over a third of the bar, but 9 out of 10 of my fellow QCs are men. There's only 1 female law lord, only 3 women out of 33 in our Court of Appeal, and following the latest round of judicial appointments, 17 out of the 110 High Court judges are women. Now, there are many reasons for this, and it's important to stress that not even those like me who are passionate about equality want to see appointments made on the grounds of background rather than merit. That doesn't do anybody any good.